I met Joyce in the 9th grade at Enoch's Junior High. We sat across from one another at the biology table, biology course. And I dated her the first time when we were in the 10th grade. The Central High had a high school ROTC unit, junior ROTC unit, which we were required to join. And we had a dance every year. And so I took her to the ROTC ball. And a funny story connected with that. I had never bought a corsage for a girl before. But, you know, I did a little checking around and got some of her friends to find out from her what color dress she was going to wear and all of this. And I went to the florist to get the corsage. And I picked out carnations, the proper color, and what have you. And the guy asked me, said, "How many flowers do you want in the corsage?" And I said, "I don't know. Put a dozen in it." And Joyce told me later that she and her mother spent the whole afternoon reworking that thing where she could wear it because it reached from her shoulder all the way down to her waist. Big deal. Country come to town. But that was our first date, and then we dated pretty steadily through the 10th grade, and then we were exclusively dating each other in the 11th and 12th grades. The Central High in Jackson had high school fraternities and sororities, and I was president of my fraternity my senior year, and we got invited to everything, you know. There were 4 fraternities and 2 sororities and Rainbow Girls, and you know, all of these organizations were pretty good at having parties and one thing and another. So we got to go to all of it. We had a blast. We just really had a good time. And I went to state that fall after we graduated in 1942, and Joyce went to Blue Mountain College up at Blue Mountain, Mississippi. Your mother went up there one year, the year after Joyce, because they were a year apart in school. And as a matter of fact, you'd think, "Ain't Joyce, it's y'all are here." Joyce was dating a guy named Don Gorman from out at the base. He was a cadet. And Gene wrote Joyce and said, "I'm coming home, get me a date." So she got Don to get Gene a date, and it was Bob Gilbert. And it took.
So that was a blind date?
Yeah, blind date. Sure was.
Really?
But anyway, that's sort of how we got started, you know. The Crawfords were, well, your granddaddy Crawford was in law enforcement the whole time that I knew him. And I got an opportunity to do a little hunting and fishing with him before Joyce and I ever got married. And so, you know, we were acquainted with one another. And some of the guys used to tell me, said, "Man, you crazy dating that lawman's daughter. You're liable to get yourself in trouble." Never worked out that way. But he was a fine man. I knew him from about the same length of time that I knew Joyce, and that dates back to around 69 years. And I never had a cross word with the man. And that's unusual for me anyway. You know, but it just worked out. He was a very profane person, but it was a way of life with that family that he was raised in, and it got him in trouble a few times. They tell one story about him. But I wasn't there for this one, but I heard it. Every time Joyce or Gene had a friend to come spend the night with them, they all 3 had to sleep in that double bed. And he had the habit of going in the mornings and say, "All right, you little bastards, get out of bed." And this strange girl popped up in the bed, and he was scrambling into the kitchen. "Why in the world did you tell me those kids had company?" She said, "If you'd clean up your language, you wouldn't have to worry about it, would you?" And the other story did involve me. We had moved to Meridian, graduated from college, moved to Meridian, and we were back over in Jackson for the weekend. And about every time I came over, and when quail season was over, we'd go bird hunting. And had a crazy law in Jackson that you couldn't sell fireworks in the city, but you could shoot them in the city. And so all of the fireworks suppliers were out around the edge of the city. And one of those things caught on fire. It was on the night before Christmas Eve. And loud noises, and Joyce and her brother got up, went to the front door, and were looking out and could see it. And I finally crawled out of bed, went in there, and in a couple of minutes, Mr. Crawford came in and said, "What's going on?" And Iva and Joyce said, "We think the Lord's coming back on the eve of his birth." He said, "Damn, me and Jack were going hunting tomorrow." But that was him. You know, he was a great guy. Like I said, he was quite a guy. And
tell me about the barbecue pit. What was in the backyard?
Well, this was after your mother and daddy were married, and of course Joyce and I were married. And every time we would go over to visit, or your mother and dad would come down, the girls would end up taking something home with them. And so your granddad had made this great big stone barbecue pit out in the backyard on a cement foundation, the whole smear. And he took me out to show it to me. I mean, invited me out to see it. You know, we weren't just out there. He said, "Come here, I want to show you." But we went out, we're looking at it, and got done oohing and ahhing over it. He said, "Now, damn it, let's see Gene or Joyce tote that off." Oh, he was a character. When I got out of college, there was a garage apartment, Don, you remember this, over the garage in the back. Joyce and I lived in that thing for about a month right after I got out of college. It was vacant, and we lived in it, and we had a real good long visit with them, and enjoyed that very much. But and wouldn't let us pay up a dime, not a dime. But he'd make those remarks about, "Let's see him tote that off," or something like that, indicating he was a tightwad. But he wasn't really. He was a pretty nice guy. But that was my beginning with the Crawford family. I'll go back and give you a little bit of background. Like I said, I got in the Army Air Corps, and your dad was in the Army Air Corps. And when he went through the classification center he went through, I think it was over around Nashville or somewhere. Mine was in San Antonio, Texas. And it sort of depended, I think, on what they needed when you went through as to how you were classified. Anyway, I was classified as navigator, and it broke my heart. And I made myself a promise right then I was going to get my pilot's wings before I got out of that. And I did. I got my navigator's wings and went overseas and flew a combat tour with the 15th Air Force, 451st Bomber Group, 726th Squadron, and came back, and the war, of course, in Japan was still going on. And we all expected to fly another tour duty. Nobody knew anything about the bomb. Just a matter of having to invade the home islands, and that would have been bloody. That would have been very bloody. Of course, Don, you have more understanding of the Japanese culture than I do or ever would have. But we knew they were ferocious fighters, and we knew what we were in for, And I've been asked a number of times what I thought about our dropping the first atomic bomb. I said, I am so grateful for it. I can't tell you how grateful I am. I said, I could just be here now because that bomb was dropped, even though I saw my combat in Europe. But it was estimated, and I don't know if y'all have read all this stuff or got it in school, but it was estimated that there had been probably 1.5 billion, 2 million casualties between them and us, and they estimated we'd lose 500,000 men invading it. invading Japan. So I was grateful for it. I didn't know, none of us knew anything about the aftermath and these kinds of things at that point in time. I don't think if I had known it, it would have changed my mind at that time. I get a little impatient with some folks that they weren't there. They didn't understand basically what was going on. They didn't understand that we were up to our necks, and it like old Patton said, you don't win wars by dying for your country. You win wars by making that other SOB die for his, and that's what it's all about, But anyway, I was glad it happened. But anyway, I had started pilot training, and I got done with my pilot training and flew transport aircraft for about 6 months, and got out and went back to school. And I was in Texas at the time, Bergstrom Field in Austin, Texas, right there at the university. And Josh wrote Gene and said, Jack's going to get out and go back to school. And said he's thinking about going to University of Texas. We're here, it would have worked out okay. But Gene wrote back and said, for Pete's sakes, y'all come up here. So they sent me a catalog, and I went through it, and I love flying, and they had an airport management curriculum in that catalog. And I thought, well, I'd stay in flying and then get a BS degree, and somehow the Lord got through to me and suggested to me about the middle of the first semester that you're some sort of nut. The people that manage these big metropolitan airports say it's a political football. Doesn't make any difference whether you know how to do it or not. If you got the right connections, you're there. So I said, I just slipped over into the transportation curriculum and got my degree. I somehow got it in my head too that I wanted to go to law school, and I had enough GI time to pay for, I guess maybe the whole thing, because back then I could have switched to law in my junior year and gone an additional year. In other words, 2 more years, and I would have had my law degree as well as my transportation degree. But I was so tired of school. I'd been in one school or another or in combat the whole time I'd been in service, and I was about to burn out. So I got out and got a job, went to work. But we had a very good time with your parents up there. We lived in apartments that were probably 50 yards apart. We were in the main house on the back porch, really, a little 3-bedroom apartment of an old house that was 3 stories, and there were 13 apartments in that thing. Wow. And it was on Laurel Avenue, and it was back 2 blocks from, I don't remember the name of the street now. It ran right through the campus. And at one time, that whole area was the front lawn of that old house. And your mother and dad lived in the carriage house out back on the top floor. And so, we were right close together. And I had an old 1939 Ford that I had the engine replaced in, and, everything else done to it. And it was safe. Wasn't very comfortable, but it was safe. Didn't even have a heater in it when we went to Knoxville. And I sat down at the Delt house and installed a hot water heater in that thing. You'd freeze your can off. We came home from Shreveport. I was at the field in Shreveport. I can't think of the name of it right now. But we came home, and no heater, snow on the ground. And Miss Crawford wrapped us in blankets, headed back. She was sweet about that. Oh, talking about that old car, I didn't meet your dad until he came to Jackson to marry Jean. He'd already started back to college, And the rumor has it that Gene was sort of down in the mouth because nothing was happening, and he was up in Knoxville, and she was at Belhaven in Jackson, and and I think Miss Crawford wrote him a note, said, if you want this girl, you better come see about it. And so he did. He came down and gave her a ring, and they got married. And
was it who wrote the note? Iva?
Yeah.
Yeah, Iva.
Okay, grandmother. Okay.
They were going to New Orleans on their honeymoon, and Joyce and I went to the Mississippi Gulf Coast on ours, and my dad let me have his car to go down to the old Buena Vista Hotel, the biggest one on the beach, and it's gone now, of course. And your mother and daddy were going to catch a train to go to New Orleans, and they got the notion that they'd like to borrow our car to take to New Orleans on their honeymoon. Gene went to Joyce and says, we pay your and Jack's way down to New Orleans for you to pick up the car, but you let us use your car to go to New Orleans after the wedding. And of course we said yeah. And so off they went. And we rode the train down a day or two later and picked up the car, and I went back to Shreveport. But we had a lot of experiences with your parents. They were good folks, and we loved them.
Well, the Tuskegee Airmen story.
Oh, okay.
As well as some of the stories around the bombing missions and whatnot.
Okay, well, the Tuskegee Airmen flew fighter cover for us. They weren't the only ones, but they flew P-51 fighter covers for us. P-38s also flew fighter cover for us, but the 38s couldn't go all the way in and come back all the way out. They didn't have the range to do that. Your dad, incidentally, flew a P-47, what they call the Jug. It was a great big airplane, single-engine fighter, rugged airplane, take a lot of punishment. Well, all of them would, as far as that goes. But anyway, they flew fighter cover for us, and they were clannish. We'd bump into them. See, we lived about, our little strip was about 12 miles due south of Foggia. It was almost 25 miles by car. I'm talking about air miles. But we had to go into Foggia to go to the canteens, get toothpaste and toothbrushes and razor blades and all that kind of stuff.
This is in England?
Huh?
Where were you based? Where is it based at?
This was in Italy.
Okay.
Foggia, Italy, and we were at Castelluccio del Sal, and our runway was steel plank. In other words, they went out there with steel plank, and they had a way to join them together, and they were laid out pretty much on the lay of the land. Our runway had some little dips and so forth in it, and we lived in tents. No substituting for American ingenuity. We were in tents, but we found out that you could get all the soapstone you wanted, and you could get it cut in blocks. And we found some mortar, and we'd make bases for the tent. It'd have that soapstone bottom and the wall up about yay high, and the tent over the rest of it. And we burned stoves made out of 55-gallon drums. They cut it in half from top to bottom, and they cut the bottom out of the one end that they and put it up in the other end, and it burned little legs, with a torch to give it stability. And it was probably that high, I guess, maybe a little higher.
30 inches high.
And I'd take a spent 155 meter shell, and we'd cut that thing in two with a torch, and then cut a hole in the bottom and weld that up and cut strips in the shell, put rocks in it, and we dripped 100 octane gasoline into that thing, and that was how we kept warm. And in my tent we decided that I made me a chair, almost like an Adirondack chair, it's made from wood. And I did a wash stand, and on the side of that B-24 there was a bubble window where the navigator could stick his head in this thing and look straight down instead of having to look through a flat deal this way. He could stick his head in that thing and look down. So I took one of those, went over to the junk pile and got one, and had some guys weld a block of plastic onto it, and they threaded it. And we got some old, we had de-icer boots on the leading edge of the wings, and it was rubber, but these tubes would expand and it would break the ice that forms on the front edge of the wings.
They still use that technology.
Yeah, they do. And I got some of those old tubes and fixed it in the bottom of that thing and ran it out, and I went out and dug a trench, a pretty good size one, filled it with rock, and we just emptied our shaving water and stuff like that into the thing. We tried to rig hot and cold running water. We took some copper pipe, we'd take a drum and clean it out good, of course, 55-gallon drum, and put it on a stand outside the tent and gravity feed water in, And so what we tried to do was to bring that water in, and we did some copper tubing around that stove and ran that then into an old oxygen bottle that was about that long and about that big around, and then back into the barrel of water we had sitting out there, trying to circulate it. It didn't work. we were never quite able to perfect that, but we lived fairly comfortably. We had folding canvas cots, and most of us did. We could get a hold of mattress covers, and we'd take them to the natives, and they'd stuff them with straw. You had to delouse it about every 2 months, because of the bugs would get back in it. You could spray it, and had little holes where you could stick that spray can up there, and it'd kill the bugs. But and that gave you some, not only a little more comfort, but it gave you some protection from the cold. Because it got cold. We had snow on the ground, that kind of thing. But we lived fairly comfortably. I tell everybody I fought a nice clean war, because if we weren't flying, we were piddling around and get 3 hot meals a day, and they would only let us fly about every 3rd day, so we had a lot of time on our hands. Places that we could have gone, but they didn't want us out roaming around. We hunted rabbits with a .45 with shot shells, and that kind of thing. But played baseball, football, whatever. But we lived fairly comfortably. I was over there 9 months. 9 months from the time we landed, and they took our brand new airplane away from us, and the day of the war was over. And we left 2 weeks after the war was over and flew an old War Weary back. And when I say War Weary, it had flown a number of missions, and the outer skin was patched. Every time you'd get a hole in it from a shrapnel or something of that sort, they'd patch it. We had rivets, you've seen them today, those little rivet guns where you put aluminum together and that kind of thing. and well, they patched it up. And we had 500 we had 4 engines. We had 500 combat hours on 3 of them, worn out. And the other one was brand new. They usually, when they'd install a new engine, they'd slow time it. By that, they'd take it up and fly it around for maybe an hour or two to sort of break it in. Because when we left the ground on a mission, we had 2,700 gallons of avgas and 6 tons of bombs. And it took everything. The motors were turbocharged, and it took everything we'd pour in there to get it off the ground. But the guts had been pulled out of those 2 engines and 3 engines, and our main gear was air over hydraulic. And every morning you'd walk out in the airplane we were assigned, that right main gear would be down. They couldn't find the leak. Shoot some air back in there and right up it would come. And if you didn't have the weight of the airplane on it, it'd stay up. In other words, it'd stay up while we were flying and be safe to land on. But you leave it parked overnight and there she went again. We got all the way with our route going over. We left from Bangor, Maine, and went up from there to Goose Bay, Labrador, and from there to Reykjavik, Iceland, Reykjavik down across the ocean down to Valley, Wales, and from there to Marrakech, North Africa, and across to Tunis and up to Georgia. And that's where they took our brand new airplane away and put us on the back of a 6x and rode us about 6 hours till we got up to our base. But in our route back, we left the base and flew back to Georgia. It was sort of a staging area. It was further down on the Adriatic. And from there straight across to Marrakech, and from Marrakech to the Azores, and from there to Gander Lake, Newfoundland. And we made it back to Gander Lake, and we were there for 3 or 4 days on account of weather. And we took off, headed to Bradley Field, Connecticut, or across the ocean then. I navigated across the ocean both ways. And they finally had to fly an engine in and install it before we could leave. And we were on our way to Bradley Field, Connecticut. And we took off the crew. We called the rest of the guys on the crew, and the officers did, and said, "Now, we're going home. We still got 2 worn out engines on here, but if we don't lose them both, we're going home. If we lose one, we're going to throw everything out of this airplane we can, but we're gone." Made it in okay, Bradley Field, Connecticut, and I'll give the Air Corps credit for this. We spent the night at Bradley Field, and then they bussed us over to an Army base where they were making up troop trains, put us on a troop train, and 2 days later we were in Camp Shelby, Mississippi, getting orders for a 30-day leave. And Mother and Joyce and my daddy drove down and picked me up. Boy, it was one of the happiest days of my life. And so those were exciting days.
Tell us about some of the combat missions that you flew. Where was that? That was in Italy, going over into Germany?
Yeah, we flew missions into northern Italy, Germany, Austria, Czechoslovakia. The longest mission we flew was to frag bomb an airfield in Prague, Czechoslovakia. We were airborne that day 11 hours.
Was that all during the night or the day?
Day.
It was daytime.
Yeah. Along about that time, see, I flew 1 or 2 missions in December of 44. And the remainder of them in January, February, March, and April of 45. I flew the next to last mission at the 15th flew. But our primary mission, they told us when we got over there, was to bomb their synthetic oil refineries. The Germans, they're brilliant people. They'd worked out a way of making lube oil and stuff out of coal. And they had synthetic oil refineries. There were, Black Hammer North, Black Hammer South, Moose Beer Bomb, Lynn's. There were 5 or 6 of them in range for us to get to, and they were hot boxes. They were very well defended from the ground. Along about this time, they had airplanes, but they didn't have pilots. So we weren't getting then the mass of fighters attacked in the bomber formations. They were up every time we flew, but what they'd do, they'd fall back and catch the stragglers. If we lost an engine in the flak over and around the target, we couldn't keep up with the rest of the formation, and they'd drop back, and those were the ones that fighters would get back, and they're what they'd go after. And we had some interesting experiences with that too. I mentioned the Tuskegee Airmen. They were right clannish people. By that I mean they were excellent pilots. They had to be, or they didn't get through, because they were, everybody thought they were a bunch of apes, and I'm talking about the powers that be in the Army, and the other branches of the blacks in the Navy, were stewards. They waited tables. They put them on combat boats, but they weren't allowed to man the guns and that kind of, it was a bad situation. So these guys had to be good, but they'd stick together. We'd bump into them in Foggia and try to socialize with them a little bit, and they didn't socialize with you all that much. But we had a couple of funny things happen. Like I said, they flew the 51s, and they could take us all the way to the targets and all the way out. Now, they wouldn't fly over the target and get in all that flak themselves. They'd let us drop our bombs, pick us up at the rally point outside the major part of the flak. And they, of course, flew twos, the lead guy and the guy flying his wing. And every time we'd see a couple of them peel off, everybody would reach over and switch to the command channel on the radio so we could hear what was going on. And we heard some funny things. One day we saw 2 of them peel off, and they went down, and we switched over to the command channel. And a few minutes, this lazy black Southern drawl said, "Hey, if y'all ain't done nothing up here, come on down. I got 6 of them cornered." And 2 of them, they had 6 of them cornered. And like I said, the stragglers would drop back. And one day, we heard this call sign. Guy said, "Sailfish leader, sailfish leader." That was the fighter call sign. Said, "Where are you? Where are you?" Said, "We've fallen back, and there's some 109s out here just waiting for us. Get back far enough to hit us." Nothing. Silence. And he called again, and silence. And third time he called, he said, "These guys about to turn up a wing, come in on us." Says, "Where in the world? Where the hell?" He said, "We couldn't use profanity on the radio. It'd get on your bad about that." But this guy said, "Where the hell are y'all?" He said, "They're about to come in." He said, "Keep your pants on, white boy. We coming." So there was a little humor mixed in with all this stuff. Now your dad, as I understand it, stepped off the boat on the 8th of May, and he missed combat, and thanked the Lord for that. because oh man, it's not something that you want to brag about or talk about all that much, but you don't want any more of it. You don't. The up there where we were, the temperature was brutal. It gets so cold. I've seen it go down to 50 degrees below 0 centigrade.
In the cabin?
In the cabin. We didn't have any heat. We wore heated suits.
Okay.
And there was electricity generated in the running of the engines, and you could plug your heated suit in almost like a socket here, you know. But it was very, very cold. And for instance, I and most of us did, had a pair of nylon gloves, thin nylon gloves that would fit in our heated suit gloves. But my gosh, I couldn't work an E6B computer and write and so forth with those big old thick gloves on. So I worked most of the time with my hands just in the nylon, and never got frostbite on them. I got this section of my face and this part of this ear frostbitten. They had various models of the airplanes, and some of the ones that were left over that we flew were almost antiques, really. They just survived, you know. And the airplane that we flew over there had the nose turret had I can't think of the word right now, but it stopped the airflow from coming back into the compartment around that nose turret. But some had blast doors on the turret. In other words, you had a door on the turret and then a blast door on the airplane to keep that cold air from blowing in there. And I got checked out as lead navigator after my 6th mission, and so I flew with different crews, different lead crews. And this one crew, this nose gunner didn't want to go over the turret with that blast door closed. So I wasn't going to make him do that. I opened it. And that's when I got this frozen and this. But that's all that ever happened to us. To me, probably one of the hairiest missions that we flew. We were flying one of those antiques. It was an old B-24 that still had camouflage paint. At the end of the war, none of them were painted. They were all slick. It improved the speed, you know. There was friction on that paint.
You mean just raw aluminum?
Yeah. Well, it was shiny.
Yeah.
It was shiny, but it had no paint on it other than the numbers and, you know, that kind of thing. And but this one, it was so old, it still had the paint, camouflage paint, and the bomb sight on it was it wasn't a Sperry bomb sight. It wasn't the Norden. The Norden was the one they claimed you could drop the bombs in a pickle barrel from 30,000 feet, and that's a bunch of junk. They were good, and if you could see your target, you could hit it. If you couldn't see it, then, you know, it's problematic. And which brings up radar. We got, and that's the reason I got checked out as lead navigator. We got our first airborne radar along in early 45, and had bad weather up over the continent, and so they were flying some practice missions using that airborne radar, and they augured one into a mountain and killed about 5 or 6 navigators, bombardiers. And so they checked some of us out as toggleiers so that we'd fly without a bombardier and we'd drop on the lead ship. When his bombs hit, we toggled ours out. And they taught us to set up the intervalometer, which spaced your bombs. That was timing. And then one mission, I was toggleiering, And they called me, the crew called me and said, "You got a bomb hung up back here." And I thought, oh, must have been the last one in the string if there's only one, because it was rigged so that if the bomb in front of this bomb wasn't gone, then this one wouldn't go. So it had to have been the last bomb in the string. So I went back there and got me a long old screwdriver and tried to pry that fool thing out, and it wouldn't go. I re-safetied the bomb. They had two fuses on them, one in the nose, one in the tail, and they armed themselves. As you dropped the bomb, those fuses had little propellers on them, and the wind would cause that propeller to spin until it got to the end and spin off, and when it spun off, the bomb was armed. And when it hit the ground, unless it was a time fuse or something like that, it exploded. And so I re-safetied the thing, bomb, even though I couldn't get it out. And they didn't say P-turkey to us about if you run into something like that, go out there and recock the rack, the bomb rack. You could do it manually, because what had happened was that shackle had frozen that held the bomb into the bomb bay, and the bomb bay tripped to turn the thing loose, but the shackle was frozen and it wouldn't turn it loose. And I didn't know that. They didn't tell us, how to do that kind of thing. So I said, well, we'll just take that one back and drop it again somewhere. And so we did. And we came in on final approach on that thing. Boom! And
the bomb fell out?
The bomb fell out. But it didn't explode because I'd safetied it. And that's another thing you didn't do. You didn't drop a bomb right close to the ground in one of those dudes, because you could do it in the 47. 47 was fast enough that they used it to dive bomb some. But you didn't do it with these big things because they wouldn't move out of the way. But out it went. And
on the runway?
No, it was short of the one runway, thank goodness. And if it hit the runway, it would have bounced along with us, but it buried in mud. It was that time of year, wintertime, and everything was muddy, and soft, and it buried in the mud. And we went out and tried to find it, of course. It never did. And I'm afraid some poor guy was going to be plowing years later and hit that thing, and But it was, like I said, there was some humor involved, but some of it was sort of black, But the mission I wanted to tell you about, the Harris one we flew, was in this old airplane. And we were leading the Air Force that day. Our airplane was leading the Air Force. And when I first got over there, we would get our bombing altitude before we made landfall going in out of the Adriatic. But the war was beginning to wind down, and they were moving their fighter squadrons further north in to protect the fatherland and all that. So we weren't getting the fighter opposition down there. And if we flew, but we had pretty good charts that would show us where their permanent anti-aircraft installations were. And if this particular day, we were flying, we were going to split the area between Graz, oh gosh, what was that other town? Pretty good sized town in northern Italy. And our route was to take us, right, they'd shoot at us, but they couldn't hit us from those two places. But those smart rascals had run some 88s out there and some flat cars. And we went tooling up through there about 15,000 feet. It's like shooting ducks at a barrel. There were 6 of us in that airplanes in that lead element, and 5 of us had to abort. Ours was one of them. I don't know, I'll explain any of this terminology that I don't make clear. An airplane engine has a prop control, the old reciprocating engines, because you regulated the prop when you were taking off. You took a bigger bite out of the air with that thing, and that was the angle of your blades on your prop. And it cruised less, and that, of course, slowed down the fuel consumption and all these kinds of things. And the prop control was gone, it was out. That prop was set. We couldn't regulate, couldn't change it.
You mean because of flak?
Flak, yeah, flak. It was the prop control was gone on it. It was the outside engine on the right wing, and as you are in the airplane, the right wing, and the number 3 engine, which was the inboard engine right next to it, was feathered. It was gone.
And you couldn't control it either?
It was dead.
Oh.
It was dead. We had to feather the prop.
Okay.
And the number 2 engine, which is the inboard on this side, had a bad oil leak. We could see the oil streaming out of the nacelle.
You had one good engine?
Cover, yeah, one good engine. And the hydraulic system. This was all hydraulics. Your gear worked hydraulically. Your flaps worked hydraulically. Your prop stuff was hydraulic, except we had a redundant control on it. As a matter of fact, there was a good bit of redundancy in the controls on those airplanes. For instance, you could have your control cables broken, but you could fly the airplane if your trim tab control was still intact. So, there's a lot of redundancy on them. But anyway, we had that one engine. We had to crank the flaps down. We had to crank the gear down when we came back. But the guy named Malcolm Hardesty was the bombardier on that crew. And let's see who. Pat Patterson was the pilot. Tennessee Tom Thurman was co-pilot. Hardesty was the bombardier. Oh dear, I don't remember the other guys. Anyway, we had to crank the bomb bay doors open. Hardesty says, "I'm gonna put a stop to this mess." So there's a bridge, railroad and highway bridge, coming out of that town, and I'm gonna blow that thing to kingdom come. And so we set him up on it, headings and all this, and he dropped the bombs, and he didn't get he always said bombs away, on the intercom. And he didn't get his finger off of the intercom button quite fast enough, because we heard him say, "I bet I missed that SOB." He laid that stick, there was warehouses down there, about 6 square blocks of warehouses. And he laid that stick of bombs right diagonally across those things. I don't know what was in them, but we had some of it up there with us before it was over. I mean, just, And we got back all right. That number 2 engine kept functioning, and we didn't fool with number 1 because if we'd have messed with it, it could have run away. And with both engines out on that one side, it could have been Katie bar the door, But we got back, and Pat put that dude on the ground the first time. And that was the only chance we had, really, because he had to throttle back to land. And if he had to pour the coal on, that prop would have gone. It just wasn't any way to hold it. But he got that dude down the first time, and they counted over 300 old holes in that airplane, and not a one of us had a wound that required stitches. Had a few little nicks and so forth, But and that flak was hot. It'd hit you and burn a hole in you, whatever you were wearing, if it didn't hit you hard. We had one guy on our crew, guy's name was Mahoney. He flew the right waist gun. And Mahoney, he was about the only guy on the crew that was younger than I was. He was a couple of months younger than I was.
How old were you?
I was 19.
Wow.
I got my wings and commissioned when I was 19 years and 10 months old. But anyway, the Mahoney he'd get nervous, and he'd run his mouth, and we'd have to tell him, "Mahoney, get off the interphone," and he would for a little while, then right back on it again. Well, this one day, coming, not this same mission, but on another mission, coming back, Mahoney was silent as a tomb. He did not open his head. And one of my jobs was to call all the crew stations after we got out of the flak, so be sure everybody was all right. And he checked in, yeah, he's okay. And so when we got back, I dropped out the nose wheel well and met him coming out of the door in the back. And I said, "What's the matter with you?" He said, "What do you mean?" I said, "You're too quiet." He said, "Come in." We crawled back up in the waist of that thing, and he reached over and got his flak vest. And this was a vest that had overlapping steel slats in canvas. Each one of them had its little, anyway. He picked that thing up, and there was a great big tear and dent in it. He said, "Look at that." The piece of flak came through the side of the airplane, hit him in the chest, and knocked him square down on the floor. Knocked the breath out of him. And then he reached over and got his flak helmet and said, "Look at there," and showed me his flak helmet. He said, "I just got back on my feet. When that one came through, it hit me in the head." He said, "I stayed down that time." So, there was a lot of levity involved and that kind of thing. But like I said, it was quite some experiences.
What kind of computer did you use to do your navigation calculation?
A circular slide rule.
Why circular slide rule?
Because they called it the E6B computer, believe it or not. Mm-hmm. But it was manual. But it had a clear 360-degree thing on it, and you used it to figure wind drift. We had a wind drift meter in the navigator's compartment, and you could, after you'd been in the air a while, you could get a shift in the wind, and that would throw you off, So we pretty often checked our wind drift. You could light it up so you could see a bend in a river. You could see the edge of a forest. The forest and the open fields look differently, and you could line those lines up with that drift meter, and when they were parallel with whatever target you picked on the ground to check, that's what your wind drift was, and plus or minus the course that you were flying. Mm-hmm. And we could plot that on that 360-degree thing, and that would give us our wind drift. And then we used it, of course, to figure your ground speed, and that was always important. And your ground speed, of course, would be affected by whether you had a headwind or a side wind or a tailwind or whatever. And a lot of people didn't understand that at that time, probably do now, that the ground, the minerals that are in the ground will affect a magnetic compass. And that was the main deal in our airplanes back then. We had a gyro compass, but you set it by the magnetic compass. And that would pull your compass off, one way or another. And then you had the metal and so forth that was in the aircraft itself, and that would also affect your course line. So that if I wanted to go from point A to point B, I'd draw a line between them, and we used a Mercator projection, which was the closest thing they could come to taking the grid of a circular thing like the Earth, right, flattening it out. And we used that, and A to B, and you'd measure, see what your true course was, okay? But then you had to vary that with your variation and deviation. The deviation was the metal in the airplane. The variation was the Earth itself, and those were plotted on your charts, so that you could figure, how much that was going to pull off of where you were going, and then you keep up with your deviation. You know what that is, and you keep up with your wind direction.
So you had a lot to do.
Yeah, and like I said, we did it with that and this pencil. The Jan said that one time in one of her classes, she had little ones, doing speech, and somehow the question came up of what I did in the war, and Jan said he was a navigator, and the little boy said, "Golly, he got to run all those computers." And Jan said, and he said that computer was in his head and, and in his hand, and what he learned. And one of the things that was amazing, it was hard for me to grasp the initial concept when you were doing celestial navigation. Most of the time you could see the sun or the stars or that sort of thing, and we had a library of books that where the various stars were computed to be at certain times and in certain areas of longitude and latitude. And while it wasn't exact, it moved so much slower. That's a little bit. Moved so much slower than the high. She's in getting a nap. Want to go see her?
No, she's getting
Oh, okay. And so but you could see the stars, and what you had to do was to pick stars that were on a triangular deal around your course line, and shoot them and plot them. But you had to plot the reciprocal, of course, because the theory being, I don't know where I am, but I know where that star is. So you would plot from that star down to your course line, and you had to shoot the three of them, and it took a little while to shoot them and do your computation. So you'd have to take your ground speed and move each of those LOPs, lines of position, to the same spot.
Right.
In order to get your
It took time between each sighting.
Yeah.
Right.
And that was interesting. I remember one practice mission when I flew. This was at San Marcos, Texas, and we crossed the Mississippi. We were going somewhere, and the guy that was number one, they would fly three of us on these kinds of missions. The guy who was doing number one was a little slow, and I only got a chance to shoot and plot one fix going to the place where we're going to turn around and come back. And I never got to complete my second one. And the instructor said, I'm not surprised that with the slowness of it and all of this. And he said, we were off course because almost invariably when you cross the Mississippi River, you'd get a wind direction shift.
Oh.
Had something to do with the low pressure and high pressure, all that. But that was, each one was different. You had to, each one stood on its own feet. Well, the rumor is that Colonel Springs won the villa in a poker game with Charlie Cannon. Now, whether there's anything to that or not, I don't know, but I heard it. And they could rent that property where it was located. And so the colonel turned it into 3 apartments, and the executives could rent it for an apartment for a fairly reasonable amount, and it was 5 bedrooms each. And it was a good deal. We went down there a lot. Matter of fact, Jan told us one time, said, I want to do my honeymoon at the villa. Oh, mercy. But she loved it, and Johnny did. And we had, like I said, we had a good time. I forgot, the villa was sold to an outfit that put a high-rise motel. it may have still been there when we had the first reunions, but the old Ocean Forest Hotel was right across the street, side street, from the villa.
Mm-hmm.
And it was the oldest old hotel down there. And we stayed in it some over the years when we go to trucking convention or something of that sort. And they had some motel rooms that they had built sort of behind the hotel itself, and they were comfortable. But the old motel, it was high ceilings, and I don't think we had any we didn't have air conditioning at the villa. And you know why?
Wow.
Ann Close wouldn't allow it. She didn't like air conditioning, so she would let them air condition it.
Wow.
But anyway, they wanted to buy the villa, and they didn't want to sell it, and they kept going up on the price, and they still wouldn't sell it. And finally, they said, well, find a comparable piece of property that you can get, and we'll swap you even. But it's got to be a pretty comparable piece. And they did. They found a place further south on the beach. Who owned that? One guy some guy that had a big chain of department stores, but they can't rent it down there, so it sits there most of the time without anybody using it, and it's a great big old house. We were fortunate enough to stay there a number of times, but it had to do with the managers' meetings and things of that sort that Springs would hold down there.
Mm-hmm.
But it was fun. And every time we go down, we'll drive by there just to see if there's anybody there. And there usually isn't. But then they own property down at Devereux and other places as well. The Springs is gone. Tell you a funny little tale about that. The L&C, when I went there, I had Springs Traffic and Transportation Departments as well as the L&C. And when Springs went on the big board, they decided it wasn't fair for some of us to wear two hats or more. So we had to make a choice of which way we were going to go. And I didn't like the guy I was reporting to at Springs at that time, so I stayed with the railroad. And it turned out I didn't like that guy too well either, but that's another story. But anyway, about a year ago, maybe two, the historical commission decided to put a marker up down on the main street in front of the L&C. It was 112 years old at that time, and they invited Crandall Close Bowles, who was CEO, there, and to make a few remarks. And it was amusing to me. She said, "Who would have thought that the L&C would still be here and Springs would be gone?" The L&C is still there. I'm going to toot my horn one time, and that's it. They sent me up to the University of North Carolina to the executive program, a 6-month deal, where you commute. And the only homework we had to do is you had to write a long-range plan for your company. And I wrote a long-range plan for the L&C at that time and brought it back and gave it to my boss. And my boss reported to Bill Close, who was head of everything at Springs and the other companies. And Bill read it, and he handed it back to Medford, at a later date, and said, "That's a good plan, put it on the shelf." And Bill Medford said, "Did I understand you correctly?" He said, "Yeah." He said, "I'm building new plants and I'm having trouble staffing them with labor. I ain't going to compete with Jack Bethea if he brings some plant in here. They're after my labor." He said, "Ain't going to happen." So it was about 10 years before we could get it implemented. But before I retired, we had moved a chemical plant, a Kroger warehouse, a glass plant, and several other smaller. I established a distribution park midway between Chester and Lancaster, right within two miles of I-77. And because all of that diversification, the LNC is still there. When I went there in 1961, the Springs gave the LNC 85% of their income. Stuff that we moved inbound and outbound for Springs. And when I left, they were giving us 15%. So that's the reason it's still there.
Mm-hmm.
Jean was a very vivacious girl. She was just bubbled over with enthusiasm, and she was very popular in high school.
Similar to Nancy's kind of personality, I've heard.
Nancy is Jean made over. Run their mouth a mile a minute, and and Jean had eyes that darted, when she was talking to you, and her eyes were never still. I mean, they were just moving all the time. But like I said, she was a sweet girl. She somehow or other, and Lou has told me since that Iva was protecting Joyce from me, was the reason that she put me down some, But when I gave Joyce her ring, and she went in to show it to her mother, she wouldn't even look at it. And Jean said, "Mother, I cannot believe you did that." I mean, really hopped on her mother about it. And Jean was the only member of the family, my side of the family or her side of the family, that came to my graduation in college. She somehow felt some responsibility for our being there, since she had written Joyce and said, "Why don't y'all come up here?" And so she came from Martinsville, and she was there for my graduation, and the only person in the family that was there. And you know how it is now, we all go to all the kids' graduations, grandchildren or whatever, And she was the only person that came to my mother's funeral. She came from Nashville down to Jackson when my mother died. And so she was dear to me. She really was. Very, very nice girl. She she was apparently a lot like your granddaddy Crawford in a lot of ways. She was playing hooky in school, and they caught her and called to come get her. And so all this came together, and Jean just knew she was going to get scalded. Her daddy grinned about it and took her out to lunch. He did. He was just like that. He was like that. And like I said, Jean was, oh gosh. Jean smoked. In high school even. Joyce never smoked, but Jean smoked. And she and Missy Ridgway, her best friend in high school. Missy's daddy was in oil, and they had goboodles of money. Missy had a Cadillac convertible of her own, and yet she'd come to Joyce's, and they'd get in Joyce's mama's car and do things. And they were out in that car one day, and they were smoking, both of them. And one of them threw a cigarette out, and it came in the back window and got on the seat and started smoldering. Jean was driving, and she pulled over the side of the road, to put it out. And Missy said, "Jean, what are we going to do?" And Jean said, "Spit on it, Missy, spit on it." She was never without
I remember her telling that story.
an answer. And did she tell you about the time that Joyce's mother and daddy were going somewhere and leaving him at home, and Missy was over at Joyce's house, Jean's house, and they'd been gone about 10 or 15 minutes, and Missy was asked Jean, said, "Where does your daddy keep his whiskey?" And she said, "Well, Daddy and Mama don't drink, but Daddy keeps a pipe up in the closet in their bedroom." So Missy had pulled a chair in there, and she was up on that chair looking for the whiskey in that closet when Otis walked in. He said, "Missy, did you lose something?" Said, "Mr. Crawford, where you keep the Kleenex?" And they got out of that one. But she was, like I said, she was a very vivacious girl. And like I said, Nancy is her mother made over. She really is. They, like I said, run their mouths a mile a minute, and both of them intelligent people, good, intelligent people. Now your dad, like I told you, I never met him until he came down for the wedding for Jeannie. He and Jeannie get married, and but he and I hit it off pretty well. Bob was another intelligent person, very intelligent. I want to say this right, because there's nothing negative about it at all. But he and I were different personalities, If Otis wanted to go hunting, I was ready. If he wanted to go fishing, I was ready. Now Bob would go with us, but he wasn't quite as anxious as I was. And he and I went with Mr. Crawford a number of times. Your granddaddy couldn't stand the sight of blood. He could not stand the sight of blood.
This is Bob or this is Crawford?
Huh?
Otis.
This is Otis Crawford?
This is Otis.
Okay.
He saw blood, he'd faint, almost. And we went fishing, Bob and he and I went fishing over in the Vicksburg area. The Mississippi River over time has changed its channels a good bit, and it's left some lakes, and that kind of thing. And Mr. Crawford loved to fish over there, and we had to go over one of the dikes or dams, whatever you call it, that have on either side of the river. And we ran over something that had a flat tire, and so it had a bumper jack, and we were out, pumping the car up, jacking the car up, put the spare on, and the jack jumped and hit his finger, Mr. Crawford's finger, cut it, and it was bleeding. And we about had to lay him down right there. He just, like I said, he would, you talk about courage. Now that man was in law enforcement, and he'd be out somewhere and some guy running from him, he'd shoot him and faint. He would. And he went y'all may know all this tale. He saw that Rossi murder case after he became a private investigator. And he went out to Texas to get him. And they sent a highway patrolman with him. And said, "Don't you bring him back without a confession." Said, we don't know whether we can convict him or not. Well, he went out there and got a confession, brought him back. He was married and had a couple of small kids. And of course the wife and the kids came back with him, and he bought Christmas presents for those two kids. He was the cause of their daddy being incarcerated, and he couldn't stand it because they weren't having any Christmas. That was the way he was. But those two stories are completely unrelated. But Bob, very meticulous. He was an engineer before he was an engineer, if you know what I mean. He was structured. He did things a certain way. But he was fun and funny. Like the other night, I told you the story about he and I out fishing in the Albemarle Sound or somewhere, and he hooked this cobia and said, "Come run the boat." And I said, "Okay." And then he told me, "Turn it into the wind, turn it into the wind." And we were 1.5 miles from shore on either side, and I'm looking up trying to see which way the wind's blowing. It didn't occur to me to look at the waves. He said, "Jack, you dull tool, look at the waves." So we came up one time, Don, I don't know whether you remember this or not, but I was in a station wagon, and your mother and dad had a station wagon. and we went over to the Outer Banks, and your mother and daddy were going. I mean, your mother and Joyce and the kids were going shopping, and Bob and I went and did some surf casting, and y'all's station wagon was what we had, and it was sitting up on a macadam road, but right on that sand, and it was hot as the hinges, and we came back, and your wagon was stuck, sitting on macadam.
It had melted into the asphalt.
It had, and we got your daddy happened to have, this is typical of him. He had a cable in the wagon, and we hooked my wagon to it and pulled him out. But like I said, he was a very, very meticulous guy, very structured, very, very pleasant. He was not unpleasant about it at all. He was he was very pleasant about it, you know. He and he was good enough to take Joyce and me up to Morristown and spend weekends up there, and we thought that was very, very nice.
But with Mom and Annie,
Mm-hmm.
with where he grew up.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah, that was nice, and we enjoyed that. I remember a couple of things that maybe will illustrate a trait or something of that sort that might be important to you. Your daddy would, when Jean was sick, Bob never accepted the fact until she died that she was sick enough to die, because we'd call and we'd always get a good report from Bob. And I finally went up there, and she called us and said, if you want to see Jean alive, said, you better get up here. So we were coming the next day, and she died that night. But your daddy, I remember at the funeral home, we were sitting with him, and he was heartbroken. You golly. And we got up to do something, and Bob reached up and grabbed Joyce by the arm and said, don't leave me. Don't leave me. And she didn't. Joyce stayed with him. And that was a trait that Don, you may know enough about it to decide whether that has any credence or not. But it was. He's asked me, tell me about Bob, you know, and this is what I'm striving to do, and I'm trying to give you as complete a picture as I know, and I don't mean that as a criticism. I hope you understand that. Difference in personalities, difference in the way we handle things, you know. There was one other story. What was it? It was in the back of my head when I started that one. But sometimes that rusty mind of mine, that rust flakes off and disturbs it. While we were still in school at UT, he was going straight through, and I was too. And he was a year ahead of me. I stayed in service long enough to get my pilot's wings, which I promised myself I was going to do. And he was back in school, so he was a year ahead of me, and we'd come home about once a year to Jackson, about once a year around Christmas time. The only time that we could, the four of us could arrange. Your mother worked at the Knoxville Utility Board, and Joyce worked at the telephone company, and we'd say that both of them got a PhD degree, pushed him through, and it's about true. But every time we would hit the Mississippi-Alabama line, we'd make Bob get out and kiss the ground.
Would he do it?
Yes, he did it. That's what I'm telling you. He's a gracious guy, you know. He went along with it. He could have told us to go to the devil and just sat right there, and that's what it would have been, you know. But he was a very, very good, very gracious person. we had so many good times together. Have parties or just go somewhere. We'd freeze hamburger patties, and on weekends we'd get those hamburger patties out, and particularly Sunday at church, and head for Gatlinburg. And by the time we'd get up there and get ready, the hamburger thawed, so we'd stick them on the grill and have hamburgers and all that business, and just do it on the spur of the moment, just let's do this, and we did it. But it was a lot of fun. It was an experience that so many siblings don't have, and I've always been grateful for that.